Good, thank you, and good morning, everyone. I will call this special General Finance Committee meeting to order on January the 11th at 11:02 a.m. I would confirm that all members are present except for Councillor Hayes, Committee Member Hayes, and she will be here shortly as soon as she masters technical issues she's having. So she's the only one that is absent. I would confirm the CAO, the clerk, and members of our senior management team and staff are present here today. I would advise that public input on the agenda was invited at TML public comment at muskokalakes.ca. No correspondence was received. Today's meeting is being live streamed and recorded on the Township of Muskoka website and YouTube channel. By participating in the open public meeting today, you are consenting to your image, voice, and comments being recorded and posted online. I would acknowledge we do have a supplementary agenda today pursuant to section 7.2.1 of Council Procedure Bylaw 2019-079. A supplementary agenda was issued to add the following. Mr. Frank Potto, Muskoka Lakes Association, to attend at 11 a.m. Item 5A, transfer of general surplus to reserves, and item 5C, 2022 budget. As we move on, item 3A, I would ask committee if there are any disclosures of pecuniary interest at this time. Seeing none, thank you. I just will note that motions have been pre-populated with random movers and seconders to expedite this meeting, and that members shall physically raise their hand until the chair has confirmed this vote. If the vote is unclear, a verbal vote shall be recorded by the clerk. This is not considered a recorded vote. I will just ask if Mr. Potto, Mr. Frank Potto, is in the waiting room. Do we have him there, Persephone? He's there, good. So I wonder, Frank, it would be seemingly best order, I suppose, if we would entertain first our Director of Finance, Mark Donaldson, and his presentation relating to this surplus in terms of reserves, and then you could chime in after that before we move on with the agenda. So unless you have a pressing schedule and you want to get on right here and now, we're certainly willing to hear you out, sir. If you'd like to wait, I don't know, maybe 15 minutes or so, and then we'd certainly welcome you at that time. Is there any preference, Mr. Potto? There, Frank, there you go. Good morning, sir. Happy New Year. There you are. We can't hear you, Frank, sorry.
Sorry, there's a delay because I'm watching the Zoom. I think you asked me if I'm happy to wait. The Director of Finance, I'm happy to wait.
Okay, good. If that works for you, sir, thank you, sir. And we'll get right back to you. Thank you. Okay, our first item of business then, item 5A on our agenda. There's a report from the Director of Financial Services, Mark Donaldson, relating to the transfer of general surplus to reserves. This report was made available to you and the public on, let me see, December the 24th at 11:58 at noon. And so we've had, I think everyone's had a good amount of time to see it, to be comfortable with it, to understand it. And at that point in time, I will ask Mark Donaldson to come on, and he has the floor. Mark, welcome for your presentation. Go ahead.
Good morning, and thank you, Chair, and good morning, committee members. Happy New Year. At the last General Finance Committee meeting, I presented a verbal report to explain the general surplus in our 2020 audited financial statements and the amount of unallocated cash recommended to be transferred from the general surplus to discretionary reserves. At the committee's request, the report before you represents a written submission on that presentation. Staff are recommending that $4,147,424 of unallocated cash be transferred to the tax stabilization reserve in 2021 and included in the opening balances of the reserve forecast for the 2022 budget. Staff will provide a further recommendation to allocate these funds to other discretionary reserves from the tax stabilization reserve in the future, and will come forward with an update to the reserve policy, which will include guidelines for reserve funding and reserve balances based on municipal best practice. And I think I stand for questions. That's my comments on the report at this time. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, good. Thank you. I think then at that juncture, we'll invite Mr. Pato to come on. Frank, if you'd like to come on and for comment, sir, on the report dated December 24th, I believe.
There's a resolution on the surplus.
Do I read it before or after?
Did Mark just give his report on the surplus?
Okay, yeah, listen, so there, good point. Thank you, Lauren. So I do have a resolution here. So we're just going to work through some of this. So I do have a resolution relating to the $4,147,424 as being part of the general surplus reported. So, I mean, I would read this motion pre Mr. Pato because it deals with where those funds will go. I will read this to you now. Moved by Councillor Bridgman, seconded by Councillor Mazan. Be it resolved that $4,147,424 included as part of the general surplus reported in the 2020 audited financial statements be transferred to the tax stabilization brackets discretionary -operating end of bracket reserve. All those in favor? Okay, there's some, are there hands up? I'm saying some.
Having some confusion here. Okay, can you call it one more time? I was having, there were some.
Oh, okay, so I see, before I call it, let's have a look here. There's a few people that are having issues. Let me ask Councilor Nishikawa, then Councilor Jagowitz. Go ahead.
I guess I thought we were going to hear from Frank before we're going to vote on the item.
No, sorry, what, yeah. Okay, you know what, for clarity, you know what, I'll let the mayor speak there on that one. Go ahead, Mayor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I guess from listening to Mr. Pato, and I think we have two items on the agenda today. First one is to deal with the $4 million and transferring that to reserves. Item two, and I believe Mr. Pato may want to speak to that item, which is our overall 2022 budget. So, you know, I think if Mr. Pato is still okay to wait, maybe we deal with this item, transferring the $4 million to reserves and approving that motion or not. If council wants to chime in on it, and then we can come back to the 2022 budget of Mr. Donaldson, introduce that to us, and then we can listen to Mr. Pato's comments.
Right, okay, good, thank you. Councilor Jagowitz, go ahead.
Sorry, can I speak about that or not?
You can. You can,
Okay,
just go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, Chair Tavis, I asked to delegate on the first item, which is the transfer to reserves, because frankly, once you vote to transfer to reserves, you take away the option to not transfer 100% of it reserves and to adjust the tax increase accordingly. So if you decided, for example, to only transfer 90% or 95%, it would have an impact on how much you raise taxes this year. So respectfully, I'd ask to be able to delegate on the first issue because it affects the second issue. I sent my request and I was confirmed to speak on the first issue. So I don't want to contradict the mayor, but I think it's something to at least consider what I have to say before you vote to approve it.
Okay, and that fair enough. So we'll ask you then to go ahead, Frank, and then we'll talk with the other committee members after we hear from you, sir. Go ahead. You have the floor.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, I'll try to get this done in less than 2 minutes. I promised the mayor I would. I've got 9 points. They're pretty quick. So the first is, I think you have to keep in mind that you've increased residential property taxes already 67% in the last decade. They were 7.4 million in 2011. They're 12.3 million in 21. That means that spending has already grown at 3 times the rate of inflation over the last 10 years. Point two, because of this, you've increased our tax rate 31% in the last 10 years, from 0.94% of assessed value in 2011 to 0.123% of assessed value last year. Clearly, this is unsustainable. You can't continue to raise the tax rate every single year. Margaret Thatcher famously noted, sooner or later, you will run out of other people's money. There's no compelling reason to raise the tax rate yet again this year. The 4.1 million of found unallocated surplus is more than enough to fund a strong capital reserve. Again, if you were to consider only transferring 90 or 95% of it, you wouldn't have to increase the tax rate this year. We support the capital spending review, and we respectfully ask you to consider all opportunities to consolidate assets and facilities so that going forward, future spending remains in line with the growth in tax base and inflation, not increasing at 3 times the rate of inflation as you have in the past. Respectfully, we point out that 67 million of future capital spending over the next 10 years seems a very large number. The mayor admonished me that this could be as much as 100 million if the numbers are off. And so I ask you to consider, as part of your review, whether that's appropriate for a township with fewer than 3,000 permanent dwellings. It works out to more than $2,000 per year for each permanent residence. Now, I realize there's more than 6,000 or roughly 7,000 seasonal homes that have to be supported, but most of the seasonal residents use far fewer services and facilities, something to consider as you go through the tax forecast and the capital spending forecast. It seems pretty clear that a raise of the tax rate is not necessary this year, but the MLA is prepared to support it as part of a broader commitment from this council to smaller tax increases in future years. We ask council to consider making a commitment to bring TML spending increases back in line with the long-term growth in the tax rate and inflation so that our tax rates don't keep going up every year. With that, I respectfully sign off and say thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Good. Thank you for your words, sir. Okay. Councillor Jaglis, go ahead, Frank.
Thank you, Chair. First off, I found it quite unusual, Mr. Chair, that you read the motion and then called for the vote without asking if there was any discussion. So I assume that was just an oversight on your part.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for that. I suppose more procedural piece than anything. What we're doing here, first of all, is simply acknowledging the $4,147,424 as surplus. So for the first time, we're actually acknowledging it and using this as a placeholder. So that's what that is what this motion is to do. We're obviously going to be having a much more fulsome discussion when we set aside the rules of procedure and get into the second part, which is the actual budget itself. But I certainly acknowledge that, you know, I guess procedurally, I apologize for not being more fulsome in that direction. So go ahead, sir, with your comment.
So may I speak to this resolution then, sir?
Please do, of course.
Thank you.
As we all can. Thank you.
Good. Because I hope others will also. I'm going to be following along Director Donaldson's report, which, by the way, was very comprehensive and very well done, and I thank him for it. It's exactly what I was asking for at the last meeting. It puts on the record the facts. And so let's go through it, a few of the details. In the opening recommendation, he talks about transferring $4 million as part of the general surplus. So there's an acknowledgement already that the general surplus is higher than 4 million. And I would agree with that. It's actually 5.8. He also states further on down on page 1 that the general surplus has been increasing since 2016 because funds that should have been set aside in reserves had not been. And I agree with this also. And the schedule he attached showed that the general surplus in 2016 was 265,000. And in 2020, which is 4 years later, it becomes 5.8 million. So this is a recent phenomenon. It's not something that goes way back into history. So then we get to the part where he elaborates on the next couple of pages as to why we should only transfer the cash portion of the surplus. And he has a note from the auditor indicating that it would be prudent to do that. The auditor doesn't address the issue, but merely makes that statement. So here's my view on it. The surplus, the general surplus is 5.8, but the reason that it's not all in cash is because our taxes receivable are 4.3 million, our other receivables are 1 million, and our inventories and prepaids are at 865,000, which is twice our neighbors. relative to size. And so what has happened is, because these funds have been allowed to accumulate in the general bank account, I believe there hasn't been possibly enough attention paid to those items. Therefore, suggesting that only 4 of the 5.8 million be transferred. Another thing just to note, I think he also states in the report that our neighbors have a similar problem. Well, that may be true, but actually not. If you go through the other 5 municipalities in the district, you'll find that the district has 0 general surplus. Huntsville has a $4,000 deficit. Gravenhurst has a break even. Georgian Bay has 2,500. Bracebridge has 700K. Lake of Bays has 805K. We have 5.8 million. So certainly we're not in line with our neighbors in this regard. After this 4.1 transfer, we'll still have 1.7 million in that reserve. So it's my belief that we should transfer the full 5.8 to reserves and allocate the 1.7 that's not in cash to a working capital reserve with an offsetting entry due to the operating fund. In other words, that we can't transfer cash that doesn't exist, and I don't think we should borrow, but we should recognize an indebtedness from the operating fund to the reserve of 1.7 million. And what this should prompt us to do is to try to reduce those assets, those taxes receivable, those inventories and prepaids, and try to generate that back into cash where it belongs and put it into that reserve. So I would, if there was a seconder, I would certainly be amending this motion to transfer the full 5.8 and to have a receivable from the operating fund for the amount that's not in cash. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so the mayor has his hand up. Go ahead, Mr. Harding.
Thank you very much. I appreciate Councillor Jagowicz's comments. I've heard personally from our director, and I'm going to follow their lead. I don't have initials after my name to qualify what we should do. I know our auditors also chimed in to suggest the 4.1. I want to take that 4.1 and relate it back to Mr. Pato's comments that maybe we don't transfer the 4.1. We only transfer 3 million per se, and we leave 1 million to reduce the tax levy. The reality is we are still putting away money into reserves for 2022. So for sake of simplicity, it's just as easy to put away the $4.1 million, all of it into reserves as recommended, I believe, by Mr. Donaldson. And if we want to short and we don't want to raise taxes that much, then we don't put away as much for the 2022 year. But that's the decision for the next 10 minutes or 20 minutes from now or half an hour from now, whenever we get to it. I think the item on the table is we have had $4.1 million over the past number of years. And the simplest thing to do is transfer that to reserves right now. And then we'll determine for budget 2022 how much money we want to put away into reserves in 2022. They can be done mutually exclusive, and I don't think it has any effect on the actual levy. It's a matter of it goes in one drawer or the other drawer, but at the end of the day, it's still the same desk. So I'm okay with the resolution as it is. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Other committee members, this is your opportunity to wade in. Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. I found Councillor Jagowicz's comments, input, suggestions interesting. I wish I had known them before we come into this session, but so I'd like a response from the treasurer on commenting on Councillor Jagowicz's proposals.
Okay, thank you. And I guess the mayor had touched on it, but certainly will. Mark, go right ahead, sir.
Thank you, Chair. So the recommendation is really predicated on the fact that reserves are traditionally considered, I think, to the general public as being cash items. Placing items such as inventory in a reserve, to me, is problematic. It's not a value of an item that is available to spend on something that would be transferred from reserves. So for example, what makes up part of our inventory costs are fuel in our fuel pumps at the operational garages around the township. So if we put the value of that in a reserve fund and we call it a reserve, without understanding the offsets from a due to from account, from the working capital reserve and so on, someone might believe that that's money that we have available to us to invest in capital works or other capital items. So I've kept my recommendation to cash alone in the hopes of making that clearer for the public what exactly we have set aside.
Okay, thank you. Just for someone different here, Councillor Bridgman, go ahead. Barb. And then Frank, and then
Thank you.
Councillor
I
Kelly.
think I think Councillor Jagler was ahead of me, but I just want to actually, Mr. Donaldson said what I wanted to say, and that is we're getting into a chartered accountant debate here, I think, on what it looks like on paper. And I think that becomes difficult for most of us and the public. I mean, we have what we have in the end, but I like to keep it simple as Mr. Donaldson said. This is cash. It goes into reserves. It's available to be spent on assets. That, for me, as a constituent, makes it much easier to understand. So I'm in full support of this motion.
Good, thank you. Committee member Jaglowitz, go ahead, sir.
Thank you, sir. I'd just like to point out one thing, and then one thing I forgot to raise. And I apologize to Councillor Roberts if I didn't bring this forward earlier. I don't know how to do it, frankly. It's very difficult to bring something like this forward. I could have sent you all an email, but that would have been then dealing with the business of council. So I felt I had to do it this way. So Mr. Donaldson, and I have a lot of respect for him, he indicates that I suggested we move inventory into the reserves. I did not. I suggested we move the cash into the reserves and then put a notation. There's another 1.7 that has been loaned back to the operating fund, okay? And the authority for that lies with the district and our neighboring municipalities. The district has a debt reduction reserve fund that it's been contributing to for years. And when it gets into a capital project, like a major sewer project or something, it takes money out of its reserves and loans it to that capital project, which is repaid. So the reserves hold non-cash assets all the time at the district. I've looked at the balance sheets of other municipalities. I haven't looked in that much detail, but I see others doing a similar thing. And it's a way. So there's nothing very unusual about it. But to make it simple, I have no objection to moving the 4.1. It's the other 1.7 that I have the issue with. And I'm happy if council agrees to proceed with this and then bring up the subject of the 1.7 at a later meeting. I think it should be dealt with because you're going to get our audited financial statement at the end of 2021, and you're going to see 1.7 million in there. Okay, and I think we should deal with it. So if I don't have support for my motion, I'll support this one and would ask that this matter of the 1.7 come back for a thorough discussion. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Okay, fair enough. And good word. So I'm seeing no hands up. I'm seeing no, oh, sorry, Councillor Kelly, go ahead.
Sorry, I thought my hand was up. Thank you, and through you, I just need a point of clarification before we move this further. If I understood Member Jaglowitz correctly, what we're proposing to transfer is $4.1 million, but it isn't entirely cash. Some of it is accounts receivable, or is that the increment of 4.1 million?
Councillor.
Anyone can answer.
Councillor Jaglowitz, go ahead.
No, Director Donaldson is correct. There's 4.1 million in cash.
Right.
There's another 1.7 million, which has been used by the operating fund in not collecting its receivables and so on, okay, or building inventories. It's that amount that I believe it is part of the surplus. He's acknowledged it, and I can correct me if he's wrong. He's acknowledged it's part of the surplus, but he's saying, how do I transfer gas and inventory into a reserve? I'm saying you recognize that if those funds had been transferred to the reserve at the end of each year, as they should have been, then the operating fund would have a $1.7 million operating loan, or it would have to have borrowed out of its reserves or whatever. So I just think we're being a bit inefficient in the way we're managing that, because we have millions of dollars sitting in our operating fund. Anyway, thank you.
Just as a follow-up, my clarification was because I thought I heard you say that part of the 4.1 million was in the form of an account receivable or accounts receivable, but it's not, it's pure cash.
4 is pure cash. There's an additional 1.7 in other forms.
Then I'm fine with this resolution. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Kelly. Okay, Councillor Bridgman, go ahead, and then I'll reread the resolution.
Thank you, Chair Savas. Just a quick note. Councillor Jaglowitz, I agree with you that if we want to set up some sort of an account in our accounting for this, but I don't think that's today's discussion. So I agree with you. It's for another time. And moving forward, if other municipalities have that kind of a working capital working within the reserves, then let's have a look at it for the next budget. So that's just, I just wanted you to know that I understand what you're saying, but I don't think it's today's discussion.
Okay, good discussion, committee, and take it under advisement as well, Councillor Jaglowitz. I hope you believe and feel that you've been heard. I will reread this resolution as I see no other hands. Moved by Councillor Bridgman, seconded by Councillor Mazan. Be it resolved that $4,147,424 included as part of the general surplus reported in the 2020 audited financial statements be transferred to the tax stabilization discretionary operating reserve. All those in favor? That's carried, unanimous. Thank you. Thank you, committee. Okay, I have a resolution here moved by Councillor Jaglowitz, seconded by Councillor Roberts. Be it resolved that pursuant to section 2.3.2 of the Township's procedural bylaw 2019-79 as amended, the rules of procedure are hereby suspended for the duration of the 2022 draft Township operating and capital budget discussion, and that they be reinstated at the conclusion of the discussion. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Okay, so we'll invite Director Donaldson to come forward again and speak to his report on the questions asked relating to the deliberation and presentation of the 2022 draft operating and capital budget. Mark, you've got the floor, sir.
Thank you, Chair. So thank you. So this morning, the report before you is an update to the last General Finance Committee meeting that includes the impact of the inclusion of the unallocated cash that was just discussed by committee from the general surplus to the reserve forecast, and describes how the increase in the funding under the Ontario Community Infrastructure Fund, OCIF, is being used to reduce contributions to reserves from the levy, yet does not significantly reduce the amount of funding available from reserves for capital expenditures. Staff are recommending that a contribution to reserves equal to the contribution made in 2021 of $3,559,000 be included, and future direction from Council based on recommendations from program master plans and the asset management plan, and recommendations will inform future recommendations on contributions to reserves, and we will refine this amount accordingly in future years. Therefore, the recommendation for the 2022 net levy is $13,029,600, which is a 3.54% increase over the 2021 net levy. And I'll stand for questions on this report. Thank you.
Good, thank you, sir. Okay, committee, here we are. This is it. This is the chance we all have to provide comment, critique, observe. There's Councillor Kelly, committee member Kelly. Go ahead, sir. You have the floor.
Thank you, and through you, and perhaps no surprise, I'm going to take everybody to my favorite topic, which is the operating expense increase year over year. I think the report is a terrific report. I think Mark has done a wonderful job. The director's done a wonderful job with it. I do have a couple of quick questions on the 2021 forecast for operating expense, operating budget summary. I think it's page 50. I assume that's not a full year number because it was presumably prepared before December was closed. So is that 11 months of actuals and 1 month of estimate?
Mark?
Sorry, I'm just getting to page 50, so just for one moment. So the question is regarding the 2021 forecast column?
It is. It is.
So that is based on a projection for 12 months. So it is based on actuals to early November, because our software does do real-time updates, and then an estimate was made to project to the end of December. So that is a 12-month estimate.
So it's fairly close because you've got 10 months of actuals already baked into it, right?
That is correct.
And my concern, as it has been all along and will continue to be, is the increase between the actual expenses pre-contribution to reserves that this organization incurred in 2021 versus the budget that we're approving today, expenses for 2022. And before I go in where I know everybody will say, oh, but the insurance cost is killed, I have reduced the difference year over year in insurance to nothing. I've held it flat, even though I know there's a big jump beyond our control for insurance costs. And we're still proposing a budget with operating expense increase of 9.4%, roughly 3 times anybody's wildest estimate for inflation. And I heard Mr. Pato suggest that, and I even made a note of it, that we have to make our, our year over year budget increases smaller. This is a great place to start. I don't understand why we're spending 10% more year over year for essentially the same service and essentially the same equipment on the pure operating side, holding insurance flat. I recognize that is that's a little bit beyond our control, but even holding that flat, that would, if you add insurance in there, we're talking about an 11% increase year over year. But holding that even, we're still talking about 9.4%. And that's where we need to focus on expense control, expense rationalization. We can't be the victims of somebody else's whim and whimsy in terms of putting expense up, and we have to be prepared to justify why it's going to cost us an increase year over year 3 times what everybody else in the world is incurring and complaining about, with inflation running a little over 3%. And that's my point. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And certainly one you've made before. So you're consistent, sir. Well done. I wonder if Mark, if you might speak to, going back to August 15th, when we started this adventure where we find ourselves on, and through the number of meetings, I believe 5 or 6 meetings to where we are today. I wonder, Mark, if you might take a minute or two and just share with us some of the extrapolate. I mean, this wasn't obviously zero-based budgeting, but to speak to Councillor Kelly's concern about these increases when you do that analysis that he's done, could you perhaps speak to that as it relates to the department heads and that whole sort of challenge that they were given to come up with their budget requirements for 2022?
Thank you, Chair. And I recognize the comments being made by Councillor Kelly. A couple of things I would just want to flag just for completeness. I would want to certainly be cognizant that we are looking to be prudent in terms of our costs and our cost estimates. We've tried to right size, if I can use that term, some of our costs this year. And in fact, when we stripped out a number of our pressures with respect to insurance and other items, we had actually reduced costs in a number of areas from what we had in previous years. I'd also want to flag that there are some one-time costs in the 2022 budget. One, for example, you see a particularly large increase on the line of professional fees and honoraria. It increases from 484,000 last year's budget. Forecast is 380,065, and it increases to 636,300. In that line item is the costs to run the 2022 election, which is a one-time cost. That cost is offset by a portion of the transfers from reserves, which is located almost at the bottom of the page. So there are some items in the 2022 expenses that would create some of that increase from the forecast that we wouldn't typically see in a year. But the way the budget document's presented, the expenses are shown on the expense side, the recoveries and the revenues are shown on the other side. So there's a couple of those items. There was an extra amount of money that was put into the building department this year to support them with some work. Again, building is not paid for through the levy. So there is an offset through the transfers to reserves line, actually, is where it nets out to. So there was a number, and we did add some one-time, or sorry, some enhancements this year. So there was the septic reinspection, there was the GIS, which again only appears in 2022. We did not have that in our 2021 number as well. So there are a couple of items that are driving that. It's not a pure apples to apples comparison, but I certainly take the comment seriously, and certainly commit ourselves to being prudent and responsible with the money that we receive through our tax levy. And insofar as the process, how the budget was developed, certainly as a senior management team, we looked at all of our expenses in the current year, went back a few years, back as far as 2018 actually, to look at our historical trends and trying to determine, where are the predictable costs and where are the costs that are, sometimes beyond our control. We refer to inflation and the rate of inflation, but a lot of the costs that we incur on an annual basis are driven by construction indices and those types of things, which are much higher than the standard COLA that we might be looking at when we look at inflation rates through StatsCan. Costs of building materials, costs of labor, those types of things are particularly higher than what we could see if we were just looking at the standard rate of inflation, groceries, and those types of things. So I think we just need to be mindful that there are some other indicators and there are some other factors that go into our forecast that are not one-to-one with the rate of inflation.
Okay, good, thank you. And I've got the CAO nodding his head, so you said all the right things there. Thank you. And I think that helps, build some fences around this as well in terms of the prudence piece of this, the fiscal responsibility. I'm going to let Committee Member Bridgman comment.
Thank you, Chair Zavitz. And Mr. Donaldson, I was going to also mention the increased costs. Everything's gone up during COVID, and we are a bricks and mortar organization. But actually, my main thing is, and what I'd like to know, because we have enhancements, and you referred to that going on. So that, if your budget stays the same from year to year, if you put enhancements in, there's going to be an increased cost. So what I'd like to know, Mr. Donaldson, I think I already know, but I think we need to highlight it, is with the communications officer, with those enhancements that we put in, what is the percentage effect of that on our operating budget? I thought it was coming in close to 3.5%, which is what we're looking at as the increase here. Am I correct on that?
Mark?
So the overall increase this year is 3.5%. As you'll recall, when we presented the initial budget, we had proposed, before enhancements, we had proposed a 1.5% increase for operating. And that was reduced at the November 23rd meeting. We had brought forward some savings opportunities. We had talked about green, yellow, red. Council had approved most of the green. So that reduced that increase if we apply those savings to our original increase. And then we added the enhancements. The short answer to your question is the 3.5% roughly breaks down to approximately 2%, I believe, is related to the enhancements. And we're at about 2.5% is on the enhancements, 1% is on the original inflationary increases that we'd included in the initial draft.
Okay, thank you. Getting a thumbs up there. Okay, I'm going to call on the mayor, then Councilor Nishikawa, then Councilor Kelly.
Thank you very much,
Pardon?
Mr. Chair. If I may, not for today, but one of the things I would love to do, because I consistently hear from constituents that CPI is 2.8% and all of our budgets should be done at 2.8%. The one thing I know is CPI doesn't take into account the cost of building roads or the cost of replacing bridges or community centers. And that is a significant amount of money. We know our public works is, 35% of this overall budget, 40% of our capital budget. And, it certainly doesn't follow CPI. If anybody's actually built anything or had anything done from a construction perspective, we're talking about 100% increase over the past year or the past couple of years. That's all going to be absorbed in our public works department that, again, has nothing to do theoretically with CPI. So it would be interesting to understand what that other, I'll call it construction index per se, is, and how that factors into our overall budgets. And I will say, and Councillor Bridgman brought it up, we talk about service enhancements. I have to say, I'm not even sure they're actually enhancements, because each and every department, our planning department need for planners, we're falling behind. And we are not delivering on our clients and our customers' expectations to deal with items in a timely fashion. We talk about people building without permits. Unfortunately, the reality is at 8 months or a year to go get a building permit, if we don't have planning staff to help them, they're going to start building without building permits. And I know the MLA said, don't put another bylaw enforcement officer on to help correct that. So we're kind of caught in the middle of where we go. And are they really service enhancements, or are they actually status quo? And so I'm totally in favor, understanding that we're more or less at a negative budget this year, but we're actually trying to deliver on the expectations and needs of our constituents going forward. So, but from a point of a future report, I'd love to get a construction, a municipal index, if you will, on what the cost of roads has done in the last 2, 3, 5 years, and some of that other infrastructure costs, because that has truly gone through the roof. And I don't know a project that we have undervalued. The cost of docks, we put away, $400,000 to replace a dock that we thought might be $200,000 in Bala. And we needed that. So those are the kinds of things that catch us consistently, and really need to understand that infrastructure cost. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, Councilor Nishikawa, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I don't agree with a lot of the comments that were made earlier. For instance, a dock in Bala, we never ever expected that dock to be 200,000 ever. As a matter of fact, the quotes were coming in, the first one closer to $1 million. So I don't quite understand feels like we're trying to dress things up to make the pain not be so great. Honestly, And I will tell you, the last 3 homes that I was involved in the construction, it was not 100% increase at all. So I just, some of those comments are not correct. But overall, I would like to ask if we can revisit the enhancements. I mean, I am not happy with this budget. I'm not happy that we seem to think we got a windfall. We didn't get a windfall. I also feel, quite honestly, that we haven't done anything this term of council. Like, we haven't built anything. We haven't added, we used to at least be able to say that we did an improvement, a major improvement to a community center or arena, or those kind of things that had a greater benefit in the community. But we haven't done anything like that, well, honestly, for many, many years, since the sports park, I would say. But also, I am very challenged at the numbers, and I feel that I need to just look at the enhancements again, if that's an area to try to bring reduction in, because I don't agree that what is being presented is best for the taxpayers.
Thank you. Councillor Kelly, Councillor Jaglowitz, and then Councillor Hayes. Councillor Kelly?
Thank you, through you. And again, I want to go back to the beginning of this discussion. I focus specifically on page 50 because it identifies and addresses only, and I'll say one thing, the top half of page 50, because it addresses only the actual expense to run this organization for the last 12 months and the budget that we're putting together and approving to run the same organization essentially for the next 12 months. I can tell you that, I understand the seduction of trying to tie this into a levy on assessed value of real estate and everything else. But the fact of the matter is, the beauty of numbers is they stand alone and they can be justified, and they are what they are. In this particular case, we have a list of numbers that adds up to a 9.4%, and I'm being generous, it's actually a 10.82% increase year over year. Before we start doing capital improvements, before we start building bridges and improving roads, this is just the infrastructure to support the business. I am not, and there was absolutely no way that we as council should be involved in trying to, rationalize that down to 3% or 1% or 2%. We need to know that it's being properly assessed. The finance director had some really good answers to this. And I think we need to capture those answers and footnote some of these numbers as an explanation for what they are, because they are what they are. It costs money to run this organization. Our job, I think, is to make sure that the money is prudently spent, and that there's no opportunity that we've overlooked to find cost takeouts. It's really as simple as that. It's all I'm proposing. It's simple as budgeting for your household expenses. And I know we can talk about whether we added service levels or whatever. We should know exactly what components make up 9.4 or 10.2 or 10.82% increase. We should be able to understand that. I need to know that and understand that in order to support it. And it is what it is. If that's what it's actually going to cost to run this organization over the next 12 months, my hand goes up right away. I just don't think that we do ourselves any service or anybody any service when we start trying to conflate this with a different percentage on levy and so forth. These numbers stand alone. There's a list of numbers that add up, and they are what they are. I'm just trying to understand and make sure that we're aware that they are surprisingly larger year over year than the cost of living increase and rate of inflation in North America, and make sure that we're in a position to understand and justify why that's necessary.
Okay, thank you. And I might ask you, sir, if I might, what do you propose? Just that, this is the very general open discussion. You're clearly not happy, and thus the reason earlier that I'd asked our director of finance to weigh in on that. I certainly can ask the CAO, who is, the man in charge of the SLT, who generated a lot of the numbers based on pass and need, et cetera, perceived need. Can I ask, not to put you on the spot, sir, and I don't mean to, what would you propose? I mean, are you just stating a sort of a general dissatisfaction as opposed to a three-part plan or rip this
No,
thing apart? It's gotta be over?
it's not a general, it's a matter of tackling these numbers and rationalizing them. And again, Chair Zavitz, if these numbers are the actual numbers, I just don't have any visibility to understand how they got to be so big. I would propose that a group of people, counselors, staff, sort of focus on this stuff. I've talked about in the past, we've talked about zero-based budgeting. I've talked about things trying to address the insurance costs, which are beyond our control, by looking at self-insurance or looking at insurance pooling with other, risk pooling with other jurisdictions. As long as we're doing and taking the prudent steps necessary to keep this under control, it is what it is. It is what it will be. And, you know, I don't think we are going to be able to fix this or address these issues today, but before the next budget, I'd love to think that there's different projects that we can take on to tackle these things and get a little more confidence that that the numbers are, you know, as ratcheted as they can be.
Good, thank you. Appreciate that. Councillor Jaglowitz and then Councillor Hayes.
I'm happy for Councillor Hayes to go first because she hasn't spoken, or do you want me to go?
Well, Councillor Hayes, if you'd like. Go ahead, thank you.
Thank you, through you. In looking at page 50, the one that stands out the most is the salaries and benefits. There's a lot of hidden expenses in there. The EI has gone up for this year. The CPP's gone up for this year. Wages and step increases have to be taken into consideration. And we did add additional staff last year, and I believe we added them midstream. So that means you're going to feel the full effect of them 100%. In January in the 2022 budget. And I think that could explain a lot of the cost increase in that area. In looking at the other areas, other than insurance, we're not increasing it by very much money. And if you look down into the revenues, which have to be looked at in hand with the expenditures, our revenues are going to increase as well. So I think, you know, with Mark saying that we're looking at a 1% increase overall, I would say that is a pretty lean increase. So, and if we go in to discuss the 2.5 for the enhancements, I will be paying special attention, but I'm quite happy with the base one that we have right now.
Okay, good words. Councillor Jaglowitz, you go ahead, sir.
Thank you. I'm glad I let Councillor Hayes go first because she raised some of my points. Before I comment on some of the very positive statements in the staff report, I would like to address that issue of the expenses. And I don't want to repeat what has been said, but a large portion of it is, as it was said, is due to wages. And this council approved most of those. The additional staff were approved. And also I brought up the 4% and the wage increases that our employees are getting. And I was promptly put down that that's something this council wants to do. So we have to pay for what we want. But anyway, going on to the positive parts, Mr. Donaldson's report, he lays out two things that I totally agree with. I agree that the unallocated cash of 4.1 million or 5.8 should not be used in place of our contributions to reserves for this year. I think that would be a mistake, as he sets out in his report. It's just causing a problem for next year. The other part of his report that I agree with, he says it because we have this situation, it should make it unnecessary to increase our contributions from the 2021 level, the contributions to reserves. And I agree with that too, and deal with what level those should be once the other studies and things have come in. Now, just as an aside, yesterday I picked up my budget binder for the district, and we had guidelines for them. They're proposing a 3.77% as their first cut, which does include some enhancements. And on the surface, that looks fairly good. But then you realize they've reduced their contributions to a debt reduction reserve by $960,000. So it would appear that our increase at 3.5 is certainly not out of line with what's going on there. So I support the director's recommendation. Thank you.
Oh, good. Thank you very much. Okay, I see no other hands. Committee, this is your opportunity here and now. Otherwise, I do have a resolution to read, and I appreciate. Sorry? Okay, so yeah, just start with that. So with that, I see Councillor Kelly still has his hand up, and then I'll read this motion. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Just to follow on Member Jaglowicz's comment about salary and benefits being a big chunk of the increase. In fact, salary and benefits year over year, 21 forecast versus 22 budget are only coming in at an 8.9% increase. So the big increase I'm worried about seems to be elsewhere.
Brevity, I love it. Okay, thank you very much. Committee, I'm going to read this this motion now. Moved by Councillor Edwards, seconded by Councillor Kelly. Be it resolved that the 2022 draft operating capital budget and forecast for the 2022 net required levy of $13,029,600 as attached to report number FIN-2022-002 be endorsed and forwarded to Township Council for approval. Before I call the vote, I see Councillor Nishikawa has her hand up. Go ahead.
Sorry, I had, when I had first spoken, I had requested to revisit something, and apparently that's not going to happen. Just wanted to get an idea that in fact it was heard and that's not going to happen.
Yeah, good, very good. Thank you for that, of course. And I saw no appetite for that, if you will. No one picked up on that. No one, none of the other committee members felt the need to. This could be their opportunity right here and now. They've had it. I'm not seeing any appetite for that. But thank you for bringing that forward. I'll call the vote. All those in favor?
That's 9. Councilor Mazan has her hand up.
Councilor Mazan has her hand up.
Oh. Okay, want to just call opposed for clarity?
Sorry?
Want to call for opposed as well? Just for
Yeah.
clarity?
Any opposed? Sorry? Okay, I think we're having, okay, any opposed?
Okay, it's carried.
It's carried. Thank you. Councilor Nishikawa is opposed. Okay, thank you. We did have a few hands up. Anyone? No, good. Okay, thank you. Oh, there's the mayor. Go ahead, sir.
Mr. Chair, from a procedural perspective, and I guess a question for maybe our clerk, trying to understand a schedule perspective. We had advertised this being considered by council, the budget, I believe at tomorrow's council meeting. Is it possible to continue to follow that through, or do we need to wait a month? Just from a procedural, we're at committee level here, and I know staff certainly want to get on with life and start working on some of the other things that we've requested of them through these budget deliberations and some more reporting. So where do we go from here?
Good, thank you. I'm going to hand it over the floor over to Lauren, our clerk. Thank you.
Thank you. So we did give advanced public notice of a budget adoption happening on January 12th, 2022. So in seeing that we're before the supplemental agenda goes out today at 2 in advance of that meeting, this can in fact be properly placed on the agenda tomorrow for approval by Township Council. And it would be proper public notice at that point.
Good, thank you, Lauren. Okay, Councillor Jaglowicz, thumbs up. Sorry, sir, you got your hand up?
I did, sir. I have a thumbs up to that, but I also wondered if you, sir, would, I had made a suggestion that there had been further discussion on the $1.7 million surplus and they come back at a later date. I wonder if you could poll council to see if that's something they'd like and direct staff accordingly. Would that be possible, sir?
Absolutely.
Just ask for a consensus.
Yeah, and so I'll just be asking committee for a consensus to Councillor Jaglowicz's request. The mayor has his hand up, and then we'll take a reading on that. Go ahead, Mayor.
Thank you. So I would support that, in the coming months, Director Donaldson can give us a report of how we would deal with that 1.7 million from an accounting perspective. Do we put it into its own special sort of reserve and do a corresponding, debit and credit to pull it out as required? So I don't think that's relevant to the overall levy potentially that we would consider tomorrow. Hopefully we can move that forward, and then in the coming months, Director Donaldson, with this behind us, can start to focus on how we deal with that 1.7 million.
Good, thank you. And I would ask committee, I'm seeing some thumbs up, sort of a nodding of heads. Committee, are we good with, very good, thank you. So that's taken under advisement. Thank you, Committee Member Jaglowitz, for your tenacity on the commentary, and it will be so. Thank you. Okay, I have, there is no new business. Do we have to get out of? Do we have to get back into the rules of procedure, or do I just read the?
They're just told that they're reinstated at the conclusion of discussion.
Okay, very good. Okay. Well, thank you, committee, for that great discussion today. I'm going to read this resolution moved by Councillor Nishikawa, seconded by Councillor Hayes. Be it resolved that this meeting, Mayor's got his hand up.
We can read this resolution, just a comment afterward. Just want to make sure that we can set timing wise, we can institute a supplemental agenda this afternoon for consideration tomorrow.
Yes, so sorry about that. So let's try again. The supplemental agenda will go out at 2 p.m. today, including the item for the budget.
Okay, good. That answers the question. Sir, your hand's still up. Done. Okay, thank you. So moved by Councillor Nishikawa, seconded by Councillor Hayes. Be it resolved that this meeting adjourn at 12:02 p.m. and that the regular General Finance Committee meeting take place on Wednesday, January 12th, 2022 at 9 a.m. All those in favor? It's carried unanimously. Thank you. Have a great afternoon. Stay warm, and we'll see you tomorrow morning.